And I think it is very common all over the place that if people wake up and they feel a little bit unfulfilled, they feel a little bit like they're not up to their potential, they feel like life isn't going the right way, it is very easy to tell yourself, if only I had more money, then things would be better. Very, very easy for everyone to tell themselves that. And I think that sometimes can be true, but we overestimate what it can do. So money can give you a better life. The list of things that it cannot do is longer for you.
I'm Patrick J. McGinnis, and I coined the term FOMO. That's short for fear of missing out, and it's why some people end up following the crowd when they should be blazing a trail of their own. But if you want to achieve greatness in business and life, you've got to break free. Come on, I'll show you how. This is FOMO Sapiens, where we explore how entrepreneurial thinkers find the inspiration and the courage to build exceptional lives. All right, everybody, welcome back to FOMO Sapiens, the show for bold thinkers who want to turn their FOMO into focus. I'm your host, Patrick J. McGinnis. Today, we're talking to Morgan Housel, renowned writer, podcast host, and the best-selling author of the book, The Psychology of Money, and also a venture capitalist. His new book, The Art of Spending Money, Simple Choices for a Richer Life, comes out this October. Now, as I mentioned, he wrote the book, The Psychology of Money, and another book called The Same as Ever, and his books have sold over 8 million copies, which is a crazy amount of books, I can tell you that, and been translated into more than 60 languages. He's a 2-time winner of the Best in Business Award from the Society of American Business Editors and Writers, and a winner of the New York Times Sydney Award. A lot of awards, a lot of things going on. Welcome to the show, Morgan.
Thank you so much for having me. Happy to be here.
I'm glad to have you as well. Now, let's start out with a question I ask all of my guests. And the question is this: what is something unexpected you learned about yourself that changed everything?
You know, I've often thought that everything that I write, whether it's a blog post or any of the books, it all starts with self-reflection. I'm just trying to figure out my own problems. I've often said that I write for an audience of one, which is myself. And I write things that I am interested in a voice that I find appealing. And if other people might enjoy that as well, then that's great. But I'm never trying to write for other people. I'm trying to do it out myself. So the answer to your question is virtually everything. I've spent the last 20 years examining my own relationship with money, my desire for it, periods when I've been envious or jealous, when I think about social aspiration, what's made me happy, what's made me content. And then as a writer, I try to figure out stories of how I can convey that, because the vast majority of financial content is a analytical lecture, which people don't really have any interest in. So if I can tell a story about it. Some specific things I've figured out about myself, though. I think as I get older, particularly, I have found ways that money can make me happier and give me a better life and make the world better for myself and my family, and using it as a tool for a better life. There is, though, a longer list of things that it cannot do for you. And I think it is very common all over the place that if people wake up and they feel a little bit unfulfilled, they feel a little bit like they're not up to their potential, they feel like life isn't going the right way, it is very easy to tell yourself, if only I had more money, then things would be better. Very, very easy for everyone to tell themselves that. And I think that sometimes can be true, but we overestimate what it can do. So money can give you a better life. The list of things that it cannot do is longer for you. And I, and maybe you and other people make more money this year than I did 5 or 10 years ago. When I think about my life 5 or 10 years ago, does my wife love me more today than she did back then? No. Do my kids admire me more today than they did back then? No. Am I healthier? Do I sleep better? No. So the things that actually give me a better life and can actually move the needle, money doesn't really play a role in that much, or it's an indirect role. And so I enjoy trying to figure out how to use money as a better life, but I'm always reminded in my personal life what it cannot do for me.
Yeah, I mean, money doesn't buy happiness, that's for sure. And it's funny, I think about money. I just was in Malta, and I was at their national museum, which is actually like not bad considering. But they had what's the word? Numismatic collection, I guess. It's what do you call the money collection? And I was going through. They had coins going back to like the BC years and stuff like that. And I was looking at all this money, and I was just thinking to myself, first of all, it's so interesting somebody collected all of it. But second of all, like if we think about all the things that have survived in time and the artifacts, like money goes way, way back, and it still looks pretty pristine today. And even as, the physical elements of money are becoming less prevalent in our lives because everything's going digital, right? Like the social and financial impact and intellectual impact of money it just grows and grows and grows, especially when you're living in a time of high inflation and just people are feeling what it's like to not have money or to have money or to want more money or to wish that they could go back to when they had more money, whatever. And so it is really pervasive around where we go. This book, unlike your last book, is about spending money. So it's a different lens. And, this is something we do every day. And oftentimes we spend money without realizing it because, you just have like all these things that are set up to pay for stuff. Why did you decide to shift your focus in this book to the spending side of the equation?
I think it's two things. One, my first book, The Psychology of Money, is very heavily about investing and making money. And that was important to me. It was something I had spent years and years thinking about. But I think there is a lot of ink spilled all over the world on how to get richer and how to invest. Some of it's very good, some of it is less good, but there's a lot said about it. It was fascinating to me to take a step back and say, how much is written about spending as I'm trying to figure out my own life? And the answer is virtually none. There is not very much written about how to spend money to be happier, even though there are literally tens of thousands of books on how to invest your money and grow your money. And I think one of the reasons why is because there is an assumption across cultures, virtually everyone, that the answer of how to spend money is very easy. Just spend more of it and that's better. Just buy a bigger house and that's better. Buy a faster car and that's better. There's just like this inherent assumption that like we don't need to say anything about this topic because it's obvious how to do it better. And I don't think that's the case. After witnessing people, rich people, poor people, middle-class people, didn't matter who it was, some of them doing a very good job spending their money in a way that definitely brought a happier, more fulfilling life. And others who did an absolutely abysmal job. And money to them was a financial asset, but it was like a psychological liability. And their aspirations, their drive for more, their comparing themselves to other people was like a debt in their life. It was this overhang. And maybe some of them had a lot of money. And that actually drove them crazy because they were like, I have the money. I have the salary. I have the net worth. And I'm still not happy. And I think a lot of the reason was the way that they were spending money and the aspirations that they had, what they wanted was this psychological debt overhanging their life. And it drove them nuts. And I think that was actually pretty common. And so this book is not called The Science of Spending Money because I don't think that exists. I don't think there's a science of spending money because we're all different. We're all unique in our own ways. We are all screwed up in our own ways. And the kind of spending that is right for me might be wrong for you. Like we're all different. It's an art. But I could have called it The Psychology of Spending Money. That's what this is. There's nothing in the book that says you should go spend your money like this. Don't spend money on this. There's nothing like that because everybody's different. It's a look at the psychology of envy, greed, social aspiration, comparison, contentment. And I think if you understand those topics, then you can contextualize it within your own life with a way to use money as a tool to live a better life rather than what it is more common, which is a yardstick of social comparison to compare yourself against others.
FOMO.
Yeah, I love that. And what's so funny is nowadays, like people always, you can see certain things that signify wealth, houses and cars, like go to Miami and it seems like everybody has a ton of money just because they put it right out front there. But nowadays, as we get into digital currencies, like you can just look on the ledger and see how much money people have, which is really insane. So it's becoming more and more prominent. We're going to get into some of these lessons, but I want to start with this basic question. Is it different if you make it versus if you inherit it?
Well, I think definitely. I think the idea of sacrifice is because one this is a slightly different topic, but I think there's a very important lesson throughout history, particularly in things like recessions and wars and times of society upheaval, that people are very willing to sacrifice if it's worth it, because they're willing to put in a lot of pain and delayed gratification and suffer if they think the goal is noble enough. And I think there's some tie in there to your question, which is that if you just inherited it, you sacrifice nothing. It means nothing to you. And I've knowing some of the people in my life who have inherited a lot of money, one thing that I've realized as well is that some of them are very down to earth, good, respectful, empathetic, respectful towards others kind of people. And others are the quintessential spoiled brat. And I think what's interesting is that some of them have been raised by the same parents. Some of them are siblings who've been raised by the same parents with the same values and whatnot. And I think it tends to be true that if you are already comfortable with who you are, and you're confident in who you are, and you're confident in your intelligence, your humor, your capacity to love, then having that much money is a tool to live a better life. But if you are a little bit insecure, you're not satisfied with who you are, you have lower self-esteem, then you can use that inherited money as a source of like social leverage to put yourself on a higher pedestal and look down upon others. And that's kind of where that spoiled brat mentality comes from. And so I think that gets accentuated when it's inherited money, because people who have earned it the hard way, I think, are much more capable of looking at their money and saying, like, I sacrificed for this. I put in a lot of hard work and dedication and sleepless nights to get this money. And it just has a more of a feeling of this is part of your soul, this is part of your identity, this is who you are, versus if you inherited it, it's much more likely to use it as a tool of social leverage against other people, because it's in some ways highlighting what you have not accomplished. Somebody else accomplished it for this money and just gave it you, but it's not necessarily yours. So there's no black and white rules here, but I think the idea of hard work, working for your money, and suffering and putting in sacrifice to gain something where the value, where it's worth it. The goal is noble enough to put it in. I think there's a lot to be said about that.
Yeah. And the other thing is, when you inherit it, assuming that you were raised in that family, like, you never knew the other side of that. Like, if you grew up poor, like, the classic American dream story, that's, all of the Horatio Alger stuff. It's like, you grew up poor, you couldn't buy shoes, whatever. And then you made the money and you're really thankful for that. And you sort of like, you've seen the other side of the coin. If you haven't seen the other side, like, you have nothing to compare your reality to, and you're just going to take it way more for granted. And then, like you said, you're going to see it as this social comparison thing and have the insecurity that you didn't actually earn any of that. And all the people who are kissing your rear are doing it because of the money you have versus who you are inherently.
Yeah. You and I right now, and I hope everybody listening to this, have plenty of oxygen around us. Very important. We don't need it. We don't think about it. I'm not sitting here so grateful for the amount of oxygen that I have. And I think for people who inherit a lot of money, that's kind of what it is. They don't really think about it. It's just something that's always been there. I remember listening to this very good interview many years ago. This is probably 10 or 15 years ago, with Zach Dell, who is Michael Dell's son. And now he's a very successful entrepreneur, awesome guy. At the time in the interview, I think he was a teenager. And the interviewer asked something along the lines of, I'm paraphrasing this, but like, what is it like to be the son of one of the world's richest men? And his response, I thought, was very astute. He said, it's all I've ever known. I don't think that much about it. I don't know anything different. And look, the average middle-class American today lives a life of abundance and prosperity that would have been inconceivable to kings 200 years ago. The average middle-class family that has, Tylenol and Advil and chemotherapy and sunscreen and these things that kings 200 years ago could not even fathom. Fruit and produce in the winter, that kind of thing. But you don't think about that because it's all you've ever had. It's all you've ever known. I think about this thing. One of the biggest material luxuries that exists among any social class is a private jet. And if you talk to a lot of billionaires, they will tell you the big house is kind of a burden. The fast car isn't that big of a deal. The jet is a luxury that you will never get. It is always amazing. That's the best luxury that exists. What's interesting is that no one, so having a private jet is the ultimate luxury. Nobody, though, no middle-class person thinks about the luxury of having a private car. And I think the reason why is because virtually everybody has a private car. It's just what we've taken for granted. You could easily imagine a world, though, in which everybody rode on buses except for billionaires that had private cars. And then you and I and everybody else would look at these people in their private cars and be like, whoa, can you imagine having your own car?
What would life be like,
you don't have to wait at
right?
the bus stop. But since virtually everyone has this, it doesn't seem like that big of a deal in the way that a private jet does. So if you've always had it, you just completely take it for granted relative to what others might see it as.
Morgan, the thing is, I don't want the private jet because I like the frequent flyer miles. If I don't, what I mean? That's important to me. So let's talk about some of the lessons in the book because, it's really cool. I mean, you're right. Like, nobody writes about this stuff. The only thing I could think of when you were talking about this is the How to Spend It page in the FT Weekend magazine, which actually like is very shallow. You're going way deeper. What are some of the things that you discovered, particularly around some of the shifts people can make that allow them to dramatically increase their happiness based on the way they're spending their money?
One that came to me fairly recently. I mean, I've intuitively known this, but I thought this was so well put. It's from the comedian Jimmy Carr. And he said, in your 20s, people worry about what other people think of them. In your 30s, you say, I don't care what anybody thinks of me. And in your 40s, you finally realize the truth, which was nobody was paying attention to you to begin with. And I think there is so, like most comedy, it's funny because it's true. I think there's so much truth in that. And I think this is important because so much modern spending, particularly in wealthy countries and higher income people, is social signaling. I want this house, this car, this jewelry, these clothes, so other people will pay attention to me. So strangers will look at me and say, whoa, look at that guy. He's so cool. I should respect him more. And the truth is, people aren't paying attention to you. They're not paying attention to your house, your car, your clothes, your jewelry. They're busy worrying about themselves. And I think, look, that's not a plea to, wear a burlap sack and say, doesn't matter whatsoever. But a trick that I've tried to do with myself is asking, if I were alone or maybe just with my family on a deserted island, nobody could see how I was living except my wife and kids. How would I live? If nobody could see my house, what kind of house would I want? If nobody could see my car, what kind of car would I want to drive? And I think in that exercise, most people would realize the difference between utility and status. The difference between this product gives me a better, more comfortable, more appealing life versus this product is a social signaling device that I've used to try to gain other people's attention. And so the example I used in the book was a high-end Toyota is a better car than a low-end BMW. Because the entry-level BMW is nothing but signaling. Look at me, I drive a BMW. Isn't that cool? I'm rich and fancy. The high-end Toyota has virtually no signaling, but it's filled with comfortable seats and a sunroof and a good sound system, whatever it might be. That's utility versus status. And so when you come to terms with the idea that most people are not paying as much attention to you as you think, and B, once you realize that, you're going to shift towards utility versus status, that's a big lifestyle increase.
Yeah, it's such a good point. And I totally agree with the 20s, 30s, 40s. I'm curious what the 50s will look like. But it is, I think about what I spent money on in New York City in my 20s and all that stuff. I'm like, why did I do that? Like, that I went to all the hot new restaurants, like all that food is long gone. The experiences were fine, but pretty much generic by the end. They're all kind of the same. And then I think about the things that I did oftentimes that were very inexpensive, but were experiential. And there was such a higher ROI on that, on all of it. So it's a really valuable way of framing up. I'd like to talk a little bit more. You did mention this earlier, but I want to go back to this because I think it bears more focus. The notion of the social debt and this sort of game that we play. How can we spot it and how can we combat it?
I mean, I think I first started thinking about this many years ago when I lived in Washington, D.C. Now, if you take the Amtrak train from Washington, D.C. to New York, there's a quiet car. And in the quiet car, you're supposed to be quiet. No talking on the phone, no talking to other people. It's where you're supposed to go to have a nice, quiet experience. What's interesting about it is how often it backfires. Because everybody who sits in the quiet car has an expectation that it's going to be perfectly silent. And if they hear one whisper from anyone, they lose their shit. They have such high expectations for quiet that they have no ability to deal with any kind of noise. And people go in there for peace. And the irony is it's people who are like so pissed off that somebody's whispering in the corner. And I think that is an expectations debt. Like that's what expectations are. They're debt that the higher you have, the more you have to like pay them off before you get any kind of benefit or increase. And so the idea that all expectations are debt, all happiness is what you have minus what you want. And I think we focus almost entirely in the economy, particularly on what you have. It's on one side of the ledger, but it's always a two-part equation. It's always what you have minus what you want. And the irony, I think, is that the latter part of the equation of managing your expectations and managing your desires is more in your control. It's more in your control for how much like that's a lever that you can pull with more oomph than what you have. Most people do not have the ability to increase their salary by 50% this year. But do you have the ability to find more joy in doing things that cost less and decrease your expectations, spend more time with people rather than wanting more things? That is much more. It's not to say it's easy, but it's more in your control than the others. So, there's a thing in psychiatry too, where just diagnosing the problem is sometimes more important than the treatment. Just if you get a diagnosis, oh, you have ADHD, that can be more important than the treatment itself, because you stop wondering what's wrong with you. Yeah, and you stop judging yourself. And I think this is true for expectations debt as well. Once you realize how important expectations are in that equation, you start paying much more attention to them. And just once you're more aware of them, you can start saying, look, if I want to actually be happier with my money, it's going to be a two-part equation. I might need to work harder and make more money and save more money. I also have to control my wants and desires, because there is no income, there is no net worth, there's no amount of spending that's going to feel like it's enough and give me a level of happiness if I don't have some level of satiation and say, that's good, that's enough. If I sit here today and imagine myself in a big mansion with a Ferrari in the driveway, and I can sit here and say, oh, that would be so great. Wouldn't life be amazing? But what I'm actually doing in that situation is I'm imagining myself being content with those things. I'm imagining myself sitting in my mansion with my Ferrari and saying, I don't want anything else. And that's what feels good. When I dream about it, that's the feeling that feels good. You imagine yourself being content. And I think there is a realization that you have all the tools right now today to have that level of contentment with what you have right now. And so when you realize that what you are actually aspiring to is not nicer things necessarily, you're aspiring towards contentment, then you put more emphasis on expectations.
This just makes me think the obvious follow-up here, because I know everybody who's listening wants me to ask this question, which is children. So one thing that's kind of struck me in the last couple of years, watching people that I know of all income levels, is you can be financially disadvantaged, you can be really rich, and you can probably equally spoil your kid, because there's so much crap that you can give. Kids love everything, right? You can get them so much crap that costs almost nothing these days. You just go to like any retailer in America, and the amount of stuff that you can buy for $100, the kid will never run out of stuff to do, or presents every day. And so it's kind of weird that there's almost a disconnection now between overall wealth and the ability to spoil your child with material goods. And as you think about that, we've also, in our society, become way more materialistic. Like you read these articles in the paper about like when kids go to college now, they decorate their bed with all of the stuff from their school. It's just like there's so much, and it's on social media and all this crap. And so our society has clearly stopped trying to instill, at least a lot of people, some sense of not being spoiled in kids. It's kind of run rampant. And it is so counter to everything you just said. And so like, how would you counsel people to create a culture with their family that eliminates some of these things, which we all know are going to lead to a road to perdition?
I think what's interesting about this topic, and I agree with everything that you just said, is that it is timeless. Where we in 2025 can sit here and say, man, the kids today relative to when I was a kid, they have access to so much cheap goods. But back in the 80s and 90s, parents said that about, God, you guys with your Sega Genesis and your Nintendo, you have so much more than we had in the 60s. And in the 60s, parents were like, man, I grew up in the Great Depression. You guys, and during the Great Depression, it was like, man, you guys have cars and telephones. Like back in the 1880s, we didn't. This has been an ongoing issue.
I really compare it all to Laura Ingalls Wilder. You know what I'm saying? The prairies. That's the baseline.
Right. That's always the case, and for sure, 100%. That in 20 or 30 years, my kids, your kids, will be looking at their own kids and saying, God, you have so much more than I did back when I did in 2025. And so on one hand, I think that's great. Isn't it great that every generation gets more material abundance than the last? That's kind of the world that I want to live in. I think it's common for the older generation to look at those kids with a sense of disdain, because it's like, man, when I was a kid back in the 1990s, I had to go climb trees to have fun, and you just have an iPad. And I think honestly, like if you were to dig into that, I think it's a sense of jealousy and envy that like I had to work hard and scratch my legs to have fun. And for you, it's just handed to you. But every generation does that. I do think there's a thing with parenting where you can never lecture values into your children. You have to lead by example. And with money, I think a lot of parents, particularly wealthier parents, will try to teach their kids values through humiliation by withholding money from them, by saying, no, I'm going to fly first class, but you have to fly coach. Mom and dad get to do this, but you don't get to do that. And I think trying to teach through humiliation like that almost never works. There's a lot of evidence, particularly in politics, where children inherit the vast majority of their beliefs from their parents. Very high correlation between what people believe politically and what their parents believed. And what's interesting about it, a lot of the studies will show, most parents don't sit their children down and lecture them about politics. Sit them down at the dinner table and say, this is why we vote this way. And this is why the other side's wrong. The kids just pick it up through osmosis, just watching their parents, what they watch on TV, overhearing them talk to other people. And I think money is very similar, where like you don't need to sit down your kids and lecture them about money. And by the way, if you do, it's probably going to backfire. But every time, from the time the child is probably 3 years old, every time the parent says, we can't afford this. Every time the parent goes to the store and says, oh, I love buying this. Every time the parent makes a comment about somebody else's house, somebody else's car, the child is forming a mental model in their head about money. And just like politics, your views on money are very heavily correlated to your parents. And so I think that's the only thing I think about as a parent myself is I can't teach my kids these values. I just have to live them. And so my value is about saving and spending and investing. I don't, my kids are young, they're 6 and 9, but I don't sit them down and say, let me teach you about money. Let me teach you what is right and wrong. I just try to do it myself. I just try to live it myself. And I think that's the best way that you can teach them.
FOMO. Yeah, model that behavior. Now we're going to go to the FOMO 4 in a minute, which is our lightning round. But before we do, I was doing a little research and I found this thing you wrote that I thought was pretty interesting about, you said this, you said, FOMO is recklessness masked as ambition. So you're talking about FOMO, which I appreciate. Thank you for doing that. And it was inside of a blog post that was titled FOMO, the worst financial trait, which I super agree with, right? I mean, I just want to take advantage of having you here to talk a little bit about what you said there. FOMO is recklessness masked as ambition. What did you mean by that?
Well, it makes me slightly nervous here that the FOMO king is reading my opinions on FOMO. Hopefully I didn't say anything too wrong. But I think that is a version of FOMO, particularly in investing, when you see other people getting richer faster than you. And a lot of people's inclination is, I need what they have. And almost nobody in that situation thinks that they are chasing the crowd. You just see someone else and you're like, oh, I'm trying to learn from them. And they're doing something differently. I'm going to go get what they have. And that feeling feels like ambition. Look at Carl across the street. He just leveraged up a bunch of rental houses and he's making a fortune and whatnot. I should go do that too. That feels like ambition. And because it feels like ambition, you don't question it. You actually feel great about it. You wake up every morning and you're like, yes, I'm putting one foot in front of the other. I'm going to go out and get this. But what you're really doing is you'd have FOMO relative to Carl across the street. That's what you're actually doing. And so it becomes very difficult to manage your emotions at that time. When you are blinded by this sense of I'm being ambitious and I'm going to get ahead, which by the way, sometimes might be true, but it blinds you to some of the risks that you're taking. Almost nobody who is engaging in FOMO knows it. And what does making a very bad financial decision feel like? Most of the time it feels great. Most of the time it feels amazing. It feels like you're doing the right thing. That's why people do it. So everyone is, I think, largely because of you, now aware of FOMO. They understand what it is. They get the concept. And virtually no one can recognize it in real time. There's a lot of things in psychology where it's very easy to recognize other people's flaws, but very difficult to recognize your own. And with FOMO, I think the reason it's hard to recognize your own is because it feels great. It feels like ambition.
Yeah, I love that. By the way, I'll add to that, which is that I completely agree with you in every sense of the word. And I think what's interesting when you talk about people not recognizing, what's been so interesting the last 5 years is when you get into the meme stock craze situations. I mean, those are always happening. We just had Kohl's. Or when you get into crypto culture, that FOMO is like, people are they talk about it and they embrace it and they use it as like, oh yeah, well, like I know this is stupid, but FOMO. And it's made its way into the way that journalists talk about markets. So like, it's funny to me that there are spaces where people talk about FOMO kind of ironically, I guess, but they totally acknowledge that that's a driver of what they're doing, which is, of course, as any investor who knows, is like a crazy thing. But that's where you start to see that money is a toy more than anything else. And that it's shocking, but it is very much part of the culture today.
Yeah. And I try to think about this a lot, and back to what we talked about earlier about like, I'm just writing about my own flaws and my own experiences. When in times have I had FOMO as an investor, as a consumer? And there are several people in my life, particularly a handful of authors, who I really admire and look up to. I think they're genuinely great people. And I don't even consider them competitors. But I would look at what they're doing and how many books they're selling and how they structure sentences, whatever it might be. And with a sense of like, oh, I should try to learn from this person. I should look at what they're doing and maybe I should do that myself. And sometimes I think that can be good, but where is the line between learning from other people and just chasing what they have and trying to copy what they have rather than doing it my own way, in my own voice and whatnot? It's difficult to know in real time what is appropriate learning and copying people who are better than you versus recklessly chasing the gains that other people have.
100%. The worst thing is when you're chasing a dream that isn't even your own.
Not even my own, right? Exactly.
That is the bad place. Nobody should be doing that. All right, let us go to the lightning round. FOMO 4. I got 4 questions for you. I need 4 quick answers. The first one is this. What is a decision you're proud of that you made fast?
One of the things I'm very proud of in my career, and I never really thought twice about, is that there were several moments in my career where I could have probably doubled my income if I pandered to the audience, and I didn't. And I didn't really think about it at the time, but in hindsight, looking back, I'm like, I'm so glad I did that because I'm happier and I ended up making more money by sacrificing short-term gain in favor of long-term credibility.
That's very good. We've all seen those people and you're like, oh, this isn't going to end well.
Right.
I'm not going to name names. After we stop taping, I'll say mine to you. Number 2, favorite use case for ChatGPT.
Oh, you know what I did? This might not be a short answer, but I promise you it's going to be worth it.
No, we're ready for it.
I did this thing about a month ago where I fed it a bunch of accurate biographical information about myself through age 20. So I said, Morgan was born here. His parents did this. This was his school situation. It was all accurate about me through age 20. And then I said, write a series of stories about what happened to Morgan from age 20 to age 40, which is what I am now. And some of them were very sad. And the thing about it is because I fed it accurate information, the stories that it spit out very easily could have been true. It did a very good job of taking the trajectory of my actual life through age 20 and extending it in directions that it easily could have gone. So some of them were, Morgan didn't really have a good college experience, couldn't really figure out any career, moved back in with his parents when he was 27, became an alcoholic, didn't really do. And, it was these stories like this that were fiction, did not happen. But when I read them, I just thought, man, it's like the saying, there, but for the grace of God, go I kind of thing. And I kind of got obsessed with this. I would stay up late reading these because it really sent home this idea that the life that I live right now, the life that you have right now, is one of infinite possibilities that could have taken place. And it's not easy to really understand that until you really dig into all the other paths that it easily could have gone.
That's a fascinating one. You just get the award for the best answer to that question since I started asking it last year. Love it. So there's no prize, but just my emotional support. That's and also that's disturbing. Like, wow, that's really insane. Okay. Next, let's cleanse the palate. What's a piece of advice you give to somebody who wants to do what you're doing?
Be yourself. This is such boring advice, but you have to be yourself. You have to do it your own way. I had writers that I looked up to, writers that I admired, writers who I thought were doing a great job, but I never looked at it and said, I want to copy them. I always wanted to do it my way. And I think the reason that I was able to do that was because, as I said earlier, I was always writing for an audience of one. I was always just doing it for me. Everything I wrote, whether it was a blog or a book, I basically pretended that it was a diary and nobody else was going to read it but me. And I think most people are very good writers in those circumstances. Most people would be very talented writers in a diary. They become bad writers once they start worrying about what other people are going to think of it, or they start pandering to other people. If it's never in your head that someone else might read this, most people are very good at telling stories, getting to the point, not rambling. And so that's I think a really important writing skill is making sure that you're really doing it for yourself and being authentic.
That's really unique. I haven't thought of that before. And it does make sense. I think people, they get caught up in what other people are going to think, or, oh my God, what if somebody reads this and thinks this, or they think and then you become dishonest. Final one. What is the worst thing you've ever spent money on?
Not that much. It's not the worst thing I've ever spent money on, so I'm going to cheat on this question a little bit. But my wife and I very recently, within the last couple of weeks, came to this realization that we don't like traveling as much as society tells us that we should. Everybody tells you you're supposed to, you gotta do travel and experiences and whatnot. And we realized that virtually every trip we've been on in the last 2 years, some of them were amazing trips. The best part of the trip was coming home. The best part of the trip was coming home and being like, I get my bed back. I get my kitchen back. All the clothes are in the right spot. And we got to this point, this was literally 2 weeks ago, where we were looking at our calendar and we kind of forgot that we had this little like local trip, not a big vacation, but like a local trip to the beach. We kind of forgotten about it, but we saw it on the schedule. And we both kind of like exhaled and our shoulders slumped. And we were like, I'm not really looking forward to it. Are you? Like, we got to get packed up with the kids and the kids are going to scream in the car. And then we were like, what are we doing? This is supposed to be fun. And so I think it's not the worst money you've ever spent, but it was actually a great realization to be like, travel at some points in your life for some people is amazing. And if it's your thing, very happy for you. I travel a lot for work. My idea at this point in my life of vacation is not traveling, staying at home, sleeping in with all of my creature comforts that I have at home.
Staycation's good. And you know what you do? You throw away all the stuff you don't need anymore. And that also reminds you how to value the things you spend on. Morgan, where should folks find your stuff? I mean, the new book, The Art of Spending Money, Simple Choices for a Richer Life, is out now. Where should they go to read up all about you and experience more of what you're talking about?
You know, I've written 3 books: The Psychology of Money, Same as Ever, and now The Art of Spending Money. My social media drug of choice is Twitter. That's where I spend most of my time. My handle is Morgan Housel, my first and last name.
Okay, there we go. Everybody, Morgan Housel, thank you so much for being here. And for the rest of you, remember, FOMO is real, but the power to master it is yours. FOMO Sapiens is recorded in New York City and can be found on YouTube at FOMO Sapiens or on your favorite podcast network. Theme music is by Mike McGinnis, editing and post-production is by Josh Elstro, and the show is produced by Matt Curtis and me. If you like today's show, please be sure to rate it and share it with your friends. And as always, you can find more about the show and me at FOMOSapiens.com and PatrickMcGinnis.com.